Tonight's presentation, Borescope Initiative 1 year later. Our presenter, Mike Bush. Mike is president of Savvy Aviation. He's an author for numerous aviation publications, certified flight instructor, A&P mechanic with IA, aviation maintenance tech in 2008 with the FAA. Been doing webinars for EAA, almost since we started. I know Mike started way back in the day, and we started way back in the day. I think 2010 is when we first started these, and Mike's been contributing every month. We sure do appreciate him sharing his knowledge and information and opinion and all this information. And tonight, I think, is going to be a really good one for us all. So I sure do appreciate it, Mike. Thank you very much for being with us tonight. I'm turning control of the presentation over to you.
Okay, well, good evening, Tim. Good evening, everybody. I changed the webinar title on you, Tim. Instead of being Borescope Initiative 1 year later, I've now updated it to be 18 months later because it's actually about 18 months since we originally launched the Borescope Initiative. But anybody who has been following the webinars or reading any of my writings and stuff know that for years and years and years I've been preaching about the importance of using borescopes as the gold standard for evaluating cylinder condition and trying to get people to change from the traditional approach where that every annual differential compression test is done. If the cylinder passes the compression test, then it's left alone. And if the cylinder flunks the compression test, then it gets pulled off the engine. It's kind of like if you went to your doctor for your annual checkup and they checked your blood pressure, and if it was not right, then they would schedule you for open heart surgery. That's what we've been doing for our engines, and I've been trying to convince mechanics, and we're gradually starting to get some influence. It's really hard to get mechanics to change how they have been doing things, especially when this is what they were originally taught. But we've been trying to convince mechanics to use borescopes more and to rely less on the compression tester and so on. And in order to really move this thing forward, about a year and a half ago, on the 1st of January 2024, my company, Savvy Aviation, launched its Borescope initiative. And the Borescope initiative involved a whole bunch of different moving parts, all having to do with trying to encourage the use of borescope inspections of piston aircraft engine cylinders and standardizing how we do those inspections. It was a pretty ambitious and all-encompassing initiative. And so, for example, we started off by defining a standardized imaging protocol. Nobody had ever sat down and written down how you're supposed to do one of these borescope inspections. It's funny. Continental, since 2003, has been saying that they require a borescope inspection to be done every time you do a compression test, which I think is a great idea. But Continental never wrote one word about how you're actually supposed to do the borescope inspection. So we created a standardized protocol that involved 11 different images taken of each cylinder and taken in a particular sequence. So it's very much like if you go into if your doctor sends you in to get a 2-view X-ray of your right hip, it really doesn't matter what radiology tech does it. They all follow a common protocol, so the results are going to be the same views. Well, this is what we're trying to accomplish with borescope inspection. So we defined this sequence of 11 views, essentially, of the cylinder, starting off with the piston crown, and 3 images of the exhaust valve, 3 images of the intake valve, some of them with the valves closed, some of them with the valves open, and then finally 4 images of the cylinder barrel at the 12, 3, 6, and 9 o'clock position. And with these 11 images, you have a very, very thorough evaluation of everything that's interesting going on inside that cylinder. Now, 11 images per cylinder sounds like a lot, and it really is, but it turns out that that once you've done it a couple of times, you can grab those 11 images in about 5 minutes per cylinder. So the whole inspection of all of the cylinders only takes about 20 minutes for a 4-cylinder engine and about 30 minutes for a 6-cylinder engine. So it really doesn't really take much longer than doing the compression test, and it's a very, very thorough inspection. So after defining the protocol, we created a 35-minute video in which we demonstrated. Actually, my colleague Dave Pasquale, who is the guru of borescopy, pretty much, demonstrated in a YouTube video how to capture each of these images, how do you position the scope, what the image is supposed to look like, and so on. We created a companion illustrated checklist so that the mechanics would have something printed that they could follow along as they're doing this. Once you've done it a few times, you pretty much have it in your muscle memory. But for mechanics that are not used to doing this, having the written checklist is pretty helpful. Then once you get all of these images, we're talking about like 44 images for a 4-cylinder engine or 66 images for a 6-cylinder engine. What are you going to do with all these images? So we created a Borescope image repository, which was a software extension to our Savvy platform that provided an easy way to upload these images into the cloud, to tag them so that you knew what each image was, what cylinder it was, and which of the 11 views it was. And then once all those images were uploaded into the repository, we provided a way of going through and looking at the images, making notes about what you see, whether the images look normal or abnormal, and if they looked abnormal, what the abnormality was, and so on. And then a report generator for printing out a nice, pretty report with all of the images and all of the annotations that you made about the images that you could include, print out and include in the aircraft's maintenance records. And finally, for people who wanted us to look at their borescope images and render expert, opinion on what we see, we added a request analysis button on the repository, so that with a button click after uploading the images, you could ask one of our the members of our analysis team to review the images and annotate them and indicate any abnormalities that they saw. And basically, we wanted to get this stuff to be used as much as possible by as many mechanics as possible. So we made almost all of it free. the protocol, the video, the checklist, the use of the repository, unlimited storage on the repository, the report generator. All of that is usable by anybody who wants to use it at no cost. You just have to create a free account on the Savvy platform so that you have, a login, username, and a password. And then you can upload images to your heart's content and play around with them, look at them, annotate them, generate reports, and so on. The analysis service, of course, we had to charge for because it involves our analysis team spending time on it. But we don't charge very much. Basically, anybody who subscribed to the Savvy Analysis service, which had previously been limited to analyzing engine monitor data, automatically were able to request a Borescope image analysis as well at no additional cost. So we launched all of this stuff about 18 months ago, 1st of January of 2024. So fast forward 18 months to today, and we've gotten some pretty good use of this stuff, and we've learned some interesting lessons from it. As of right now, we've had a little over 140,000 Borescope images uploaded to the Borescope repository on the Savvy platform. And actually, if you go to the website, this statistic and various other statistics are displayed. So 140,000 images. If you assume that all the uploads were complete 11 image per cylinder inspections, following the protocol, and you assume that the engines were 4 cylinders, 140,000 images comes out to about 3,200 inspections, complete inspections. Now, it actually turns out that some people uploaded less than all 11 images, so actually the number of inspections is a little higher than that. But it represents a pretty significant number of engines being inspected, mostly using the Savvy protocol, because the repository sort of tries to guide you through doing things using the Savvy 11 image per cylinder protocol. So now of this 140,000 images representing something over 3,000 engine inspections, we don't know the exact number, but 2,230 of them click the request analysis button. So our guys have actually looked at 2,230 engine inspections over the last 18 months. And in the course of doing that, we looked specifically at 7,353 exhaust valves. Now, these numbers start to get kind of interesting. When they looked at the exhaust valves, 911 of those 7,353 valves appeared abnormal. They appeared to have some sort of heat distress, what people, colloquially called burned valves. And by the way, these numbers are all up on our website, and they're updated every 60 minutes. So you can look there and see exactly, how this project is going along. We also have live statistics on the engine monitor stuff, and we're now up to something over 9 million flights of data that has been uploaded to our system. Of course, we've been doing that for a whole lot longer. We started gathering engine monitor data back in about 2010, and of course the Borescope thing we've only been doing for 18 months, so it's got quite a ways to go to catch up. But still, 140,000 images is, pretty significant number. So I want to drill down on these numbers a little bit and show you some of what we've learned. So again, we've looked at 2,230 inspections, and in the course of doing that, looked at 7,353 valves. And if you divide 7,353 by 2,230, you get a funny number. You get 3.3 exhaust valves per engine, which seems a little bit low. And it's really because some people uploaded partial inspections and didn't upload the full complement of 44 or 66 images. And also because some of the images were not really reviewable because the image quality was inadequate. And one of the things that we can mark when we are going through this is that the image isn't good enough to render an opinion on because it's out of focus or it's not well lit or something like that. So that's why this didn't come out to be something you'd expect it to be a number between 4 and 6, because that's how many cylinders we have on our engines. But it came out lower than that just because not all the images were good, and because not every person who uploaded an inspection stuff uploaded it for all the cylinders. So now if we look at the 7,300 and change exhaust valves we reviewed, 911 of them showed heat distress. And that indicates that something over 12% of the exhaust valves that we looked at were heat distressed. That's a surprisingly high number. That over 12% of the exhaust valves are heat distressed. It may not be quite that bad because there may be some selection bias here. There's an argument that says that people were more likely to upload Borescope images to the platform if they suspected something might be wrong. But certainly, I think it's fair to say that if you took a snapshot of all the airplane engines flying around out there, something over 10% of the exhaust valves would be starting to get in trouble, and that's a surprisingly high number. Now, the other interesting thing is if you compare that 911 heat distress valves with the number of inspections that we took a look at, which is 2,230, and you divide that out, that turns out that that's somewhere north of 40% of the engines that we analyzed had at least one heat distress exhaust valve. And again, that number may be a little higher than what is actually going on, but I think it's certainly fair to say that something over a third of the engines flying out there have at least one valve that is that's in trouble. And again, that's a surprising result. It's a if I had to guess, I would have not had guessed that it would be that high. So it was quite interesting. So at any rate, we come to 40.9%, maybe lower that number a little bit based on possible selection bias, which of course we can't really measure. But here's the good news. Of the 911 heat distressed exhaust valves that our analysts looked at, and we ask them when they're looking at exhaust valves, if they find them abnormal, to classify them as either early stage or late stage heat distress. And of the 911 heat distress valves that they looked at, 798 of them were early stage, which is just really very, very good news. It means that almost 90% of the heat distress valves were caught early enough that the cylinder probably didn't have to come off, that the valves could be resolved simply by lapping in place. And of course, I've done webinars on how you do that and so on. We've had almost 100% success in lapping valves in place. I mean, the hardest part that we find is convincing mechanics that it's okay to do that, because it's not in the service manual anywhere. And it's like, well, how can we do this if it's not an approved procedure? Well, if you look at the regs, it doesn't have to be an approved procedure. It only has to be an acceptable procedure. But at any rate, the vast majority of heat distressed valves that were caught in these borescope inspections were caught early. And this is the big advantage of using the borescope rather than the compression tester, is that we can catch these things much earlier, and we can catch them early enough that that we probably don't have to remove the cylinder. We can remediate the problem in a much less expensive and less invasive way. So we're talking about the difference between, if we catch it early, we're talking about lapping a valve in place, which is roughly $200 parts plus labor. I mean, there's basically no parts, just some grinding compound and some Q-tips and an electric drill. And, you know, that there's an hour and a half of labor or something involved in lapping the valve. So it's figure somewhere in the order of $200. Whereas if the cylinder comes off, which has been the traditional remedy when the valve got in trouble, you're talking about somewhere between $2,000 and $4,000 parts and labor, depending on whether the cylinder is simply going to be pulled off and sent out for repair, or replaced with a reconditioned cylinder, or replaced with a new cylinder. So there's a fairly wide range of costs involved, but they're all expensive and they all have 4 digits on them. So the fact that close to 90% and even allowing for selection bias, maybe you say more than 80%, of the cylinders don't require removal because the valve problem was caught early enough that they're good candidates for lapping. And in fact, the situation may be even better than that, because in our experience, even late stage valves can sometimes be rescued by lapping in place. And as an example of that, A&P friend of mine named Ashley Blythe sent me this photo of a valve. It was a number 4 exhaust valve in a Continental IO 550B that was on a Bonanza. Engine was about 500 hours since major overhaul. And in the borescope inspection looked like this, pretty profound hot spot on the valve in the 11 o'clock position, turned green, which is usually a really bad sign. And pretty much anybody who knows anything about borescope inspections would look at this image and say, this is a late stage valve. It's probably not a good candidate for lapping. Most likely the cylinder needs to come off. Well, this particular Bonanza happened to be one that Ashley flies himself. And he's a big fan of valve lapping and very experienced at it. So he figured, well, before I pull the cylinder, let me just give lapping a shot and see what happens. He didn't expect it to be successful, but he figured, you know, he was willing to invest an hour of sweat equity into trying this out before taking the step of removing the cylinder. So he lapped the valve in place, did it quite aggressively, which would obviously be needed for a valve in this condition, and flew the airplane for a few hours, and a few hours later pulled the spark plug, stuck the borescope back in. And this is after just a few hours. I mean, normally we do a follow-up inspection after 15 hours to see how we're doing. This was done very early, but you can see that the valve has almost resumed normal condition. I would still want to check it again at 15 hours and make sure that it looks perfectly symmetrical. The compression on the cylinder after the lapping went from the 50s up to the 70s, and this valve very likely was restored to health, even though it seemed to be in pretty bad condition. So, even valves that are in pretty bad shape, it's probably worth giving lapping a try. And for the 80 some odd percent of the valves that are caught at the early stage, we have almost 100% batting average in getting them resolved through lapping in place without having to remove the cylinder. So even with late stage valves, it's usually worth trying lapping first. It might be successful, might not be successful, but it's a pretty easy thing to try. And if it is successful, it saves a lot of money and a lot of downtime and so on. So it's our attitude about lapping is, what do you have to lose by giving it a try? But certainly valves that appear to be early stage distress almost always can be resolved with lapping and without cylinder removal. So just a few key takeaways from what we've learned here. First of all, something on the order of a quarter of the engines flying around have one or more valves that are heat distressed. And if something isn't done about them, then the valve will ultimately progress to failure. And by the way, an exhaust valve failure is a pretty serious failure. In a four-cylinder engine, it's a very serious failure. Usually results in a forced landing. In a six-cylinder engine, you may be able to limp to an airport because six-cylinder engines run quite a bit better on 5 than four-cylinder engines do on 3. But still, it's a pretty serious problem. So we don't want them to happen. So a lot of engines have distress valves, surprisingly large number, and the vast majority of those can be caught early enough by doing regular borescope inspections that they can be fixed by lapping in place for a couple of $100 and avoiding cylinder removal. On Continental engines, particularly, anytime we lap the valve, we also replace the rotocoil, the little thing that rotates the valve, simply because those things are frequently the cause of the failure of the rotocoil. Is a fairly frequent cause of heat distress valves. Certainly not the only cause, but it's one. And the rotocoils are quite inexpensive. And so while you have the valve train apart for the lapping procedure, it just sort of makes sense not to put the old rotocoil back on, but to put a new one on. And the key is to do regular borescope inspections, which give us the ability to catch these distressed valves early enough that the likelihood of being able to fix them in a non-invasive way through lapping is very high, and the necessity of cylinder removal is drastically reduced. And as I said, a thorough borescope inspection only takes 20 or 30 minutes, even if you do the full 11 image per cylinder protocol. It'll take longer than that the first time a mechanic does it if he's not familiar with doing these inspections. But once he's done it a time or two, it goes quite rapidly. And the interval, how frequently these borescope inspections are done, we think they definitely need to be done no less frequently than every 100 hours, and ideally every 50 hours. Certainly any time a spark plug is out for cleaning or gapping or rotating or anything like that, you definitely want to stick a borescope in the hole. It just doesn't make sense to remove a spark plug and not take a look in the cylinder with a borescope. In a perfect world, we would look at these valves every 50 hours. In the real world, it's probably going to be more like 100 hours, because most people only have these inspections done at annual, and the average GA airplane flies around 100 hours a year. But if we do these inspections regularly, and we're paying attention, we'll catch these valve problems, which are unusually common, in an early enough stage that cylinder removal is not required. So that's sort of the summary of the interesting stuff that we've learned from our first 140,000 image uploads. And of course, as more and more of this stuff gets uploaded, we'll be learning more and more. We've made some changes to how we classify the valve failures, the valve problems, and we're working on some interesting AI classifiers that I'll be talking about in a subsequent webinar, that will be able to look at borescope images and determine whether they're normal or abnormal without the necessity of a human taking a look at it. So it's some pretty interesting things. But I just wanted to share that with you. I thought it was quite interesting. I thought there were some real surprises in those numbers, and wanted to share them. So that's all I have for tonight, Tim, but I'd be happy to answer some questions about borescopes or whatever else.
All right, Mike, thank you very much. We do have some questions. Several people were kind of wondering, is there any breakdown of which type of engine, like Continental versus Lycoming, in terms of the numbers, like anyone more susceptible to having exhaust valve burning, according to the data?
I actually don't have those numbers handy. They would be easy for us to derive. I know I can answer from experience that the Continentals tend to burn valves more often than Lycomings. Lycomings tend to stick valves more often than Continentals. Name your poison, But yeah, the heat distress of valves is more frequent with Continental engines than with Lycomings in my experience. And the reason is that the Lycomings use sodium filled exhaust valves that do a better job of removing heat from the valve head through the sodium filled valve stem. And Continentals use solid stem valves, so they are more dependent on the contact between the valve and the seat for dissipating the heat. So Continentals just do seem to burn valves more frequently than Lycomings do. I wish I could quantify that for you. We certainly have a lot of data. I just didn't happen to do that calculation.
James was wondering, is there data on the number of hours on those valves and cylinders that are failing?
Good question. Whether we have that in the database, I have a feeling we might. These are some really good ideas. Or they make me want to go back and do some more number crunching. So keep those questions coming. I wish I had answers for them, but I wouldn't be surprised if we have hours information that we could analyze.
Andrew wonders, do stats show that a certain cylinder numbers are more susceptible to burned or distressed exhaust valves?
Not that I'm aware. I don't think anybody's ever taken a look at that. But I mean, we've looked at an awful lot of exhaust valves over the years, and I'm not aware of any pattern. There are certainly some cylinders that run hotter CHTs than other cylinders on various of these engines, but I'm not sure that there's a correlation between high CHT and the likelihood of valves burning. The burn valves are really not an issue with the cylinder itself running too hot. The burn valves are an issue with the valve having trouble dissipating the heat because the heat sink is there's something wrong with the heat sinking that is allowing the valve to. I mean, the peak the peak temperatures that happen in these cylinders during the peak of the combustion event are horrendously hot, and the valves have to have a good way to get rid of that heat in order to survive. And if they don't, then the metallurgy starts to come apart. And as I said, in Continentals, most of the heat is dissipated through the interface between the valve and the seat, whereas in Lycomings, there's some dissipation there, but most of it is through the stem to guide interface, so that the two kinds of engines have two different kinds of valves that get rid of their heat in a different fashion.
This kind of leads into Ralph's question. I think you just answered half of it, but Ralph asked, what causes the problem and what can be done to stop it?
Well, the thing that actually, let me start by answering the question in the contrapositive or whatever it is. The thing that doesn't cause it, which everybody seems to think it does, is how the pilot operates the engine. Anytime valves burn and cylinders come off, there's always guilt feelings on the part of the pilot about, oh my God, what did I do wrong to cause this to happen? And it generally is nothing that the pilot did wrong. It's a hardware thing. It's not a software thing. In the case of Lycomings, if the valve guide is worn enough, then the heat path between the valve stem and the guide no longer is what it should be. In the case of the Continental engines, if there are deposits that are built up on the valve seats that prevent the that insulate, provide insulation between the valve head and the seat. That can cause another problem we see a lot with Continentals is, as I mentioned before, the rotator fails. The Continental rotocoils have a little garter spring in them that provide the rotation, and the garter springs wear out. They develop a flat spot on them, and eventually they no longer, the rotator stops rotating. And once the valve stops rotating, then a couple of bad things happen. One is that one edge of the valve is exposed to more heat than the other edge of the valve, so the valve is being heated differentially. And the second problem is that the rotation tends to scrub the seats clean, and when the valve stops rotating, deposits build up on the seat a lot more rapidly than when the valve is rotating correctly. So rotator failure is something that causes quite a few Continental valves to burn, and Continental has known that their rotator has got problems, and they've been promising us a new rotator design, rotocoil design, for years, but it hasn't materialized yet. So it's just kind of a known problem, which is why we always replace the rotocoil anytime we have the valve train apart on a Continental. Lycomings also have rotator caps that sit on the top of the valve, but the Lycoming rotators work differently, and they don't seem to have as many problems as the Continental ones do. But generally speaking, it's not something the pilot does wrong, and it doesn't particularly seem to correlate with cylinder head temperature. It has to do with just the mechanical nature of the valve train, and in particular how the valve is able to shed its heat in order to stay at a reasonable temperature.
Richard wonders, is there any correlation between exhaust gas temperature, EGT, and the failure?
Not that I can tell, but of course, exhaust gas temperature is a funny thing because what we see on the EGT gauge is not really the temperature of the exhaust gas. the exhaust gas starts out extremely hot when the valve first starts to open, and then rapidly cools off. So if you were sitting where the EGT probe is located in the flow, and you could measure the instantaneous temperature, you'd see it gyrates wildly over time. That each time the valve opens, there's this very short spurt of very, very hot gas, followed by ever decreasing temperature. Then the valve closes and the flow stops, and the probe is looking at pretty much stagnant exhaust gas for about 2/3 of the time, and then the valve opens again, and there a little spurt of really hot gas comes back out. And so what we're reading on an EGT probe is really the probe equilibrium temperature as it's trying to integrate all of these wild temperature changes. We can't really. It's not like a constant flow of gas at a constant temperature. When we use the same sort of probes way downstream in the exhaust system, like say a turbine inlet temperature gauge on a turbocharged engine, then we're seeing pretty much what a real gas temperature, because the pulsiness has been pretty much neutralized by the time the gas gets down to that probe. But EGT probes are really not measuring a real temperature. They're measuring a wildly changing temperature that the probe is integrating over time into some equilibrium probe temperature, if that makes sense.
Hmm. Blake and several other people are asking the question about Rotax. Is there any benefit to do Borescope inspection on Rotax engines, and any Rotax inspection protocols included in the database?
That's a really good question. I do not know. I know we do a fair amount of Rotax engine monitor data analysis, but I honestly don't know if we have any significant number of Borescope images from Rotax engines. I mean, the principles would be the same, but my sense is that the Rotax engines have a lot less valve problems. It's just a much more modern engine design, frankly. But and the whole cooling system is quite different because the Rotax heads are liquid cooled. But that's another thing. I'm making notes on things that I should go back and check on, because there's some really interesting questions here that we might be able to derive some answers to if we take a look.
Yeah, a lot of great questions from everybody tonight.
Yeah, I
Peter
appreciate
wonders.
that.
Yeah, Peter wonders, are you concerned that a valve that has been heat stress and then recovered by lapping is now in danger of failing anyway?
If a valve is warped in any way, it's the lapping is not going to be successful. The lapping takes only a very, very, very tiny amount of metal off of the mating surfaces. And we also have some conditions that can happen to the seat that we call waterfall distress of valve seats, that generally are beyond the ability of lapping to correct. So, if the valve's it either has significant metal erosion, or if it is warped in any way, which sometimes happens when valves are profoundly burned, then lapping is not going to be successful. It's not going to bring it back, and the cylinder will have to come off. So lapping doesn't cure every valve problem, but in our experience, it cures a very large percentage of the problems if they're caught sufficiently early. And the key to catching them early is to do regular borescope inspections.
Joe just wonders, should we just proactively do lappings every so often, every couple 100 hours, for example?
I would tend not to do that. It just sort of goes against my basic maintenance philosophy that says we shouldn't be doing maintenance on a timetable. We should be doing it on condition, and the emphasis should be on condition monitoring as opposed to doing regular preventive maintenance. I mean, there's some things we do on a timetable. We change oil on a timetable, but the whole idea of doing the borescope inspections is to keep a close tab on condition so that we can take appropriate remedial action when we know that there's a problem. So, if somebody who's a believer in time-based maintenance as opposed to condition-based maintenance could make a case for lapping, every 500 hours just to clean everything up. That's probably not the way I would opt to do things. I would rather do the borescope inspections, every 50 to 100 hours, and then whenever I see something that looks a little funky, then lap the valve.
Randall's question is very similar. Should we just change out the rotors, rotor coils every 100 hours on Continentals?
No, but maybe every 500 hours. I mean, you can make a case for doing that. Again, it's really a question of whether you're a believer in doing things on a timetable or whether you're a believer in doing things on the basis of condition. Another thing you can do, interesting, is on a Continental, you could just take the rocker covers off every couple 100 hours, and tap the valve with a mallet and see what make a Sharpie mark on it and on the rotator, and then tap it with a mallet and see if it rotates. If it doesn't rotate, then you want to change it. So you could do a condition inspection on the rotator without really taking anything apart other than just pulling the rocker cover up.
Ernie says, my Continental 0300 engine doesn't have valve rotator caps. What can I do to help prevent the valve damage?
Well, it's true that the 0200s and 0300s don't have rotators. And the answer of what you can do is you can borescope them regularly. The valve lapping and everything works. The rotators are a good idea. And we also have, for reasons that I've never totally understood, but we very, very seldom see stuck valves in big bore Continental engines, but we do see stuck valves in 0200s and 0300s. It's an earlier design. I'm not exactly sure why the valves stick, although I assume that they stick for the same reason that they stick in Lycomings. It's the deposit buildup on the valve stems that cause the sticking. And my personal belief is that valve sticking will become vastly less of a problem once we're using unleaded fuel. So, if you have an 0200 or 300 and you can run it on MoGas, and most of those engines will qualify for running on MoGas. It's just that a lot of airports, it's kind of hard to get MoGas on the field. But running the engines on unleaded fuel eliminates a lot of valve problems.
Ed wonders, can the repository handle a 9-cylinder engine? Must be a radial that he has.
Oh, good question. I just wrote another question on my list.
Okay.
I'm not sure if it can handle a 9-cylinder engine. And the next question is, can it handle a 13-cylinder engine? I just can see it coming,
Okay, here's a good one. So for everybody that doesn't have a Borescope image, Tom wonders, what Borescope devices are recommended for good quality images?
Well, most of the stuff that we do, we use Vividia VA400 series scopes. There are a lot of scopes on the market now. The prices have come down dramatically. You can get a good scope for $250 now. And where it used to be that it cost thousands of dollars to get a Borescope, but now they used to be optical. Now they all use little cameras at the end of a wand. The two things that we find important, first of all, we really like rigid borescopes with articulating tips for doing borescope inspections of cylinders. There are a lot of flexible borescopes out there now, and the flexible borescopes are good for a lot of things, but we find them kind of hard to manipulate in cylinders. A rigid borescope with an articulating tip is it seems to be the optimum instrument to use for cylinder inspections. Um, and we want them to obviously have good lighting and high resolution. And so a lot of the borescopes that we were using 5 years ago were kind of like a joke now because the images quality is so terrible. But the current crop of borescopes, like the current version of the VA400 Videoscope, is a full HD image. It's a really, really superbly sharp image where you can see a lot of detail. So, but good resolution and decent lighting and an articulating tip are really the things to look for when you're choosing a borescope. And there are a lot of them out there now that are available.
Dale wonders, can an owner pilot, not a licensed mechanic, do borescope inspections?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because, I mean, basically, all you're doing is removing the top spark plug, which is certainly something that an owner is allowed to do under his preventive maintenance authority. And then you're just taking a look in the hole, which certainly anybody can do. There's no prohibition against looking. So absolutely, we really encourage owners to buy their own borescopes, especially since they're so inexpensive. And frequently, we get better quality images from aircraft owners than we do from mechanics. We're trying to get everybody to learn how to do good imaging, but before developing the protocol, we would constantly get images that the person who took the image was very proud of, but that had very, very little diagnostic value. So the whole purpose of developing the 11 image protocol was to say, here's what we need to look at in order to really evaluate the condition of the cylinder. And here's how to position the camera to get each one of these images. We would find that very, very few people would take images of the valves with the valves open. They would always take images of the valves closed, and then that would be it. And images with the valves open are very important because that's where we can actually see the sealing surfaces, the what's called the face of the valve and the seat that it mates with. And then by positioning the scope a little bit differently, we can look in and see the valve stem and the bottom part of the valve guide and see how much deposit is built up. If it's an exhaust valve, if it's an intake valve, we're interested to see whether there's any oil present. There shouldn't be any oil present on the backside of the exhaust valve or the intake valve. And so that's the reason that we developed this protocol, because we were getting a lot of images of with little or no diagnostic value, and so it was important that the person taking the pictures know what pictures need to be taken.
William wonders, have you cataloged the images of distressed valves, and if so, are they available on your website for us to look at?
I think the answer is no, in the sense that he's asking the question. All of these images are in a big database on AWS, but I don't. There's no way. We don't provide a way for anyone who well, I was about to say something that isn't quite correct. I was going to say that that we don't have a way of person A uploading images to the system and then person B looking at them. We actually do have the ability for an owner to upload images and then share them with his mechanic and stuff, but the mechanic has to have an account, and then the owner has to grant access permission to the mechanic's account. That we don't publish the images publicly, and I think we might have a privacy problem doing that, because the images are the property of the person who uploaded them. But you know, I think there might be a good argument for de-identifying some of these images and making them publicly available in some sort of a catalog, so that people could just, you know, as a learning device. And so let me take that one under advisement, because I think it sounds like a good idea. We just have to be a little bit careful about the privacy aspects of it.
John wonders, is Savvy still accepting Borescope images for free?
Oh yeah, absolutely. We will indefinitely. That stuff is all available. As I said, the only thing we charge for is if somebody wants to upload images and then have us look at them, then they have to subscribe to the Savvy Analysis service. But all of the tools, the repository, the report generator, all of that stuff, all of that's available to anybody who wants to use it at no cost.
Paul says, are you trying to train AI on the good versus bad valve images so AI can do evaluations?
As a matter of fact, I have an upcoming webinar that's a status report on our project there, and we're making really good progress on an image classifier for exhaust valves. Right now we've only been working on exhaust valves because they're the most critical component in the cylinder that tend to go bad, and it's amazing just in the last 3 months how more accurately we've been able to get the AI classifier to work. And I've got a webinar coming up right after AirVenture, where I'll be talking about what we're doing in that area. But it's been an interesting project. We're trying to do a lot of innovative stuff with AI on engine monitor data, on Borescope images. We're big believers in that, because we would like to do, you know, as much predictive analytics stuff as we can without having to have humans looking at this data, because I mean, we've been having humans looking at this data for the last 16 years, but it's expensive. And, you know, we'd like to be able to make it cheap or free, and AI will give us the ability to certainly make it very inexpensive. So we're working hard on that on various fronts. We've got a number of projects. I'm doing a webinar on an update on our project Gadfly, which is our generalized anomaly detector for engine monitor data, and talk to you about what we're doing on that. And then I have a webinar coming up about our first attempt to do an AI image classifier for Borescope images of exhaust valves.
Marvin asks, you've primarily talked about valve issues. What problems are you finding elsewhere in the cylinder?
Well, just to go over it, we're interested in looking at the piston crown, because that's where we will see detonation or pre-ignition signatures. If there have been abnormal combustion events going on in the cylinder, the most obvious place that they show up in imaging is on the piston crown. So that's why we're interested in that. On the cylinder walls, we're first of all, we're interested in the state of wear of the cylinder walls, and things like how much cross hatching is left, to what extent is there corrosion pitting on the cylinder walls, and then sometimes we'll see things like vertical scoring, which can be indicative of a broken ring. Sometimes we'll see vertical smearing of aluminum at the 3 and 9 o'clock position of the cylinder barrel, which is indicative of a piston pin plug or piston pin cap scuffing. The piston pins in both Continental Lycoming engines are free floating pins that have aluminum caps or plugs in the ends of them to protect the cylinder against being scored by the steel piston pin. And if the piston pin moves off center and gets stuck, then we'll start seeing aluminum smearing on it. So you'll see some aluminum showing up in the oil filter, and you're wondering, well, where's it coming from? And so that's one of the things that we like to look for. And as I said, the valves, we're interested in looking not just at the face of the valve, which for exhaust valves gives us a pretty good heat map just from what the deposit pattern is on the face of the valve, on the head of the valve. But we're also interested in looking at the contact surfaces of the valve and the valve seat, which you get by taking an image with the valve wide open and the scope positioned to look sideways across the valve. And we're also interested in looking at the stem and the valve guide for evidence of things like excess deposit buildup on an exhaust valve or of oil on an intake valve. So those are some of the key things that we look for with these various images. And this is the reason that we want the 11 different images to be able to cover all of that ground.
Michael was wondering, once you did a webinar about the quote unquote sleeper issue of lifter corrosion, spalling, and cam lobe damage in our engines. Has the Borescope project shed any further light on that pervasive problem?
Well, I'm not sure what you meant by the sleeper issue, but the Borescope can be a very useful tool in terms of determining cam and lifter issues. This is a sort of a fairly long discussion I'm not going to get too deeply into right now, but it depends on the design of the engine. For example, 6-cylinder Lycomings it's quite easy to stick a Borescope in the oil filler port and to image several cam lobes and their respective lifters, whereas 4-cylinder Lycomings don't provide a good way to do that. And so with 4-cylinder Lycomings, we have a real problem not being able to get a good look at those things. Continentals, there are 2 different Continental engine designs that are for big bore Continentals, or sandcast engines that have a oil cooler in the front and an alternator in the back, and there are Permold engines that have a alternator in the front and an oil cooler in the back. And the sandcast engines are kind of like the 6-cylinder Likes. You can stick a Borescope down the oil filler and get a pretty good look at the cam and lifters. The per mold engines you can't. But the Continental engines differ pretty significantly from Lycoming's in that the Continental engines, you can pull lifters from the outside and look at the lifters directly, and just by removing them. And once you've removed the lifter, you can look through the vacant lifter bore at the cam lobe. So there are good ways to inspect the cam and lifters on those Continental engines. Lycoming engines use mushroom style lifters that can't be removed from the outside. The only way to remove a Lycoming lifter is to split the case. So it again depends on the configuration of the engine, whether it's Continental or Lycoming, whether it's 4 or 6 cylinder, whether it's per mold or sand cast if it's a Continental, as to what we can, what kind of access we have with the Borescope, looking at cam and lifters. Some are easy to look at, some are impossible to look at. It just varies.
Tom wonders, is there a video? How do we find it on doing the inspection and assessment?
The 35-minute video that Dave did on how to execute the 11 image protocol is on the Savvy's YouTube channel. And if you go to the Savvy Aviation website, you go to the resources section. There's a whole group of resources grouped together that are related to the Borescope initiative, and they include a link to that training video, a link to the checklist, a link to the user's manual for the repository. All that stuff is available in the resources section of the Savvy Aviation website, savvyaviation.com.
Yep, right on there, right on the screen right there. So
that's true, it is.
Yeah, great, Mike. Hey, excellent presentation. Let's wrap it up. Why don't you take a moment and share closing thoughts with us?
Okay, well, my first closing thought is thanks for all the great questions. Some really excellent questions of things that I've taken some homework assignments, so I really appreciate that. If you're not on my on our newsletter list or mailing list for monthly newsletters and various other mailings that we do when something newsworthy happens, the easiest way to do that is to text the word Savvy, SAVVY, to 33777, and you can put yourself on our mailing list that way, or you can go to the savvyaviation.com website and click on the button, or you can, if you stick around for Tim's post-webinar survey, you can check a box if you want to be added to the email list. These are my 4 books on general aviation maintenance. They're available at the EAA bookstore, Aircraft Spruce, on Amazon. All 4 of them are also available in audiobook format that you can get from Audible. And if you're coming to AirVenture, there'll be hopefully lots of them in the bookstore, at least in the early days of the show. Sometimes they sell out, but hopefully they're stocked up. The podcast that I do with Paul New and Colleen Sterling, we're doing 2 live podcast recording sessions at AirVenture, which are always a lot of fun. They're a little terrifying for us because we don't get to see the questions in advance. But at any rate, we're doing one on Tuesday and one on Thursday at AirVenture. So for those of you coming to AirVenture, please come and bring your thorniest questions for us. We'll have a lot of fun with them. And finally, next upcoming webinars, as I mentioned, the August webinar right after I get back from AirVenture, I'll be giving an update on our project Gadfly, which is our generalized anomaly detection AI project that basically looks at engine monitor data from flights. We've got 9 million flights uploaded to our platform now, and it looks at them and tries to determine whether something weird happened during that flight that one of our analysts ought to look at. So it basically, we get a huge number. We get something like 10,000 flights a week uploaded to our platform. We obviously can't look at them all. And typically, historically, we've just looked at the ones that aircraft owners have asked us to look at because they thought something was wrong, that the engine hiccuped or something. But we wanted to be more proactive than that and be able to detect problems that the owner didn't even know he had yet. And so that's what Gadfly is about. It's to flag flights if they look anomalous enough for to warrant a human analyst taking a look at them. September webinar is called Ready Fire Aim, and it's talking about the importance of doing things in the right order when it comes to aircraft maintenance. I think that's all I'll say about it right now. But it's a bunch of interesting war stories of things that weren't quite done in the right order and didn't have great outcomes. And finally, in October, I'm going to be talking about our AI classifier efforts on for Borescope images, specifically our exhaust valve image classifier project, which has now gotten to the point that it's we're getting good enough numbers out of it in terms of accuracy and lack of false positives that I think it's pretty much ready for prime time. So we're going to probably be actually turning it on, making it available probably shortly after AirVenture. But it's been an interesting project, and we've made some really good progress on it over the last couple of months. So I'll be talking about that in the October webinar. And so that's all I have, Tim, until next time, and hopefully we'll see a lot of you guys at AirVenture if Tim arranges for good weather.
We're going to have good weather, Mike. I already put the order in.
Okay, well, everybody, you take the post webinar survey, put something in the comments about good weather. Just
good weather. Hey, how many forums are you going to be doing in live here at AirVenture?
I think I'm doing a dozen forums plus the 2 Ask the A&P sessions.
Oh, you're going to be
plus
busy.
One
wow.
Plus a session at the media center.
So there's plenty of opportunities for anybody coming to AirVenture to see you live and in person do a presentation.
Oh yeah, I'll be moving all over the place. They've got me scheduled for a couple of things that would require me to have a transporter rather than a golf cart. So I don't know what I'm going to do about those. But
good luck with that then. Well, I hope you have a great convention, Mike. It was an excellent presentation tonight. Thank you so much, and thank you for everything you're doing with Savvy and all the Savvy folks there. This is really, really amazing and awesome stuff. Great report. Congratulations, and God, thank you so much for taking the initiative to do this to help us. And well, more to come. Thank you so much. Great lineup of webinars where we hear more about it, and the incorporation of AI is so exciting. So thank you, Mike.
Yeah, it really is. It really is a lot of it's a lot of work, but it's a lot of fun. We're really enjoying some of the AI stuff that we're working on.
You're changing the paradigm.
Yeah, it's amazing how fast this stuff has been moving.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And to everybody who tuned in, thank you so much for joining us. Don't forget, next week, next Wednesday, Professor Paul's talking about non-towered airport operations. Hope you can join us for that one. Have a great night, everybody.
Good night, everybody.